Gopperud is in. Gopperud in alone with Stewart. Back in. Scores! Over the blue line, space. Philly on near circle. Backdoor feed. What a blocker save by Portillo! Here comes Halliday. Left wing joined by Beck. Halliday will sauce it for Beck. Stick lift. Forehand. What a goal! For plenty of time and space, walking in near circle, to the back end of the slot, Eber beats it, tucks it in, what a goal! Cross ice, D. St. Val has it, backdoor shot, what a save, Portillo, it's loose, and another save, right pad, he's miraculous!
Welcome to our house. You're listening to the Fighting Saints Report.
And we welcome you into another edition of the Fighting Saints Report podcast. Jack Milewski joined remotely once again by Jim Leitner. And on this episode, we're going to try to quench the thirst for hockey content, although you can't absorb, obviously, any new hockey content in terms of live games with the NHL season still suspended. But there's a lot of good hockey things that you can be watching right now while you continue to isolate and take care of yourselves, hopefully. But first and foremost, Jim, welcome onto the show once again. And how's everything going with you?
Oh, not too bad. We're hanging in there. Same old, same old. It just like everybody else, we're kind of just trying to figure things out and try to pass the time as quickly as possible and hopefully find a resolution to all this soon. And, you know, I think we're all in it together. So, I mean, it's not like, you know, anybody has it any worse than anybody else. We're, you know, just trying to grind our way through it, and hopefully it'll be over sooner than later.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are right now. There's a monotony to everyday life, and you know, sometimes you feel like you get into that anyway with maybe a 9-to-5 job, but this is even more so, I think. But one thing that people are trying to do is search for, you know, some positives. And I was actually thinking about this the other day of how many FaceTime calls or how many Zoom calls, things like that I had done in the last 2 weeks. And I honestly think that I've done so much better keeping up with old friends in these last 2 weeks than at any other point in my life. So maybe that's the one positive I'm looking at right now is I've talked to people that I haven't talked to in years. I don't know how it is for everyone else, but I've been doing a lot more of that, which has actually been nice, albeit I wish it was in different circumstances.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and that's a good goal. Hey, like say, geez, I haven't talked to this person in a long time. Let's reach out to them. Just send them an email or send them or call them or do a FaceTime or whatever. I mean, it's kind of a good, it's a good exercise to keep your mental capacity sharp. And, you know, like you said, you connect with old friends that you maybe forgot about, or, you know, kind of you move on to different phases of your life. And, you know, it's a good goal. Hey, let's connect with someone that we haven't thought about in a while, and, you know, bring a smile to their face.
Yeah, speaking of connecting with old friends, and you'll hear it here in a little bit, we connected with an old Fighting Saints friend, Austin Rueschhoff. You'll hear that interview later on in this Fighting Saints podcast show. But what we're talking about today is maybe not the best thing for your mental health if you watch too much of these, but we are going to be talking some TV and just shows or things that you can do to continue to get your hockey content that you want, that you need, that you maybe crave during this time. If we were in the middle of a normal world right now, we would be getting to the end of the USHL regular season. There would be only 2 weekends left, and we would be at the end of the NHL regular season and about to dive into the playoffs. So this is a time, I think, when you really, really are going to be missing hockey in the next couple weeks, and that's why we're bringing you this show. But also we're going to be talking about other ways that you can just watch some hockey to take your mind off the fact that the first round of the NHL playoffs would have started today.
Yeah, no kidding. It's kind of a bummer when you put it into that context, but you know, we're kind of settling into our new normal, and you know, we're just, instead of, you know, the Final Four would have been this last weekend, and for basketball, and I'm like, you know, I wasn't even thinking about that. I was, you know, thinking about how do I get through, you know, this next day, or how do I entertain myself and the family this weekend. And I almost forgot about it until I saw a mention of it, that it was actually this weekend. So, you know, there's nothing you can do about it. Just try to find something more pleasant to think about instead of what we missed out on.
Yeah, well, the one thing I've been doing is I haven't been watching live games, obviously, but NHL Network, I think, has done a tremendous job. And NBC Sports started this a couple weeks back when they did Hockey Week in America, replaying some of the best games from the last roughly 10 to 15 years, really, ever since they got the rights to broadcast the hockey games. It was from that archive. But NHL Network has an archive of endless hockey games, and they've just been replaying. Some of them feel like random games from this year. But what I really like that they do is they play classic games, like games from the 70s and the 80s. And as nice as it is to see the current crop of players in the NHL playing some games from the last couple seasons, I really love the vintage games when they throw it back. So I've been watching a lot of those on NHL Network.
Yeah, it's excuse me. It's always kind of fun to remember or think back to what the game used to be like and see the differences between, yesterday's game and today's game. And it's amazing. You look at the big thing that I notice is like the goaltenders' pads, how small they are. And just how small those goaltenders are. They don't fill up the nets quite the way they do today. And, you see how wide open the game was. And, I've watched some pretty good documentaries too about, that era that's gone by. And that's what really stands out, and just how different the game was. And, it's, I don't know if the game was better then or now. I mean, that's another debate for another show, but it's always fun to look back and see how different the game was.
It always amazes me every time I see him doing an interview that Darren Pang was ever an NHL goaltender. I mean, it's shocking because you could stack three Pangers on top of each other and you would make one Andre Vasilevsky. It really is amazing how much that position has changed. And like you said, the game in general, but I feel like that position more so than anyone else has made a huge difference in the way hockey is played now.
Yeah, even you look at the USHL level over the last, 5 or 6 years, how many times do you really see a smaller goaltender? You really don't. I mean, they're always those big guys that fill the net. And, there are a few outliers here and there, smaller goaltenders who do a nice job. But yeah, for the most part, if you're not 6'2", 6'3", there's really, you're kind of on the outside looking in as a goaltender.
And I think it's even interesting we say, quote unquote, smaller goaltenders, because you're referencing the guys that are 5'10", 5'11", 6 foot.
Yeah, exactly.
That was a big goaltender back in the day still. So the position really has changed tremendously. But you did mention documentaries on hockey. Are there one or two that you would recommend watching and tuning into if you have some free time?
Well, the one that's the most recent one that I saw was the one on Connor McDavid. Excuse me. It's called Whatever It Takes. It was I think it was last year he got injured. He hurt his knee real bad, and it's basically chronicles what he did over the course of a summer. Sorry, I got a frog in my throat. Basically, what he did over the summer to get ready to get himself back into playing shape and to be able to play an NHL season. Basically, blew out his knee, and it was a recovery that would have taken probably at least a year or 2 years under most circumstances. And it was really interesting because they really did a deep dive into, the rehab process, like over 1,000 hours of rehab process. I think it was like 180 days of rehab, and just the scientific process that went into it. He didn't have surgery, which was, if he would have had surgery, it would have been probably at least a year or two before we saw, arguably the game's best player back. But he did a lot of things like hyperbaric chambers, stretching, pool workouts. There was a lot of just, it was really neat to see how the rehab process went, and how his ligaments and everything reattached, and how he just basically did how gingerly he had to take it at first. And then basically by the time opening day came around, he was back to full strength and playing, and scored a goal. And it was almost like a miracle how he was able to come back in the course of 5 or 6 months after really a gruesome injury. And but it really makes you appreciate, not only his inner drive, but, the technology and just how far we've come medically, that a guy could get back on the ice after really a gruesome, devastating knee injury.
Yeah, I love watching stuff like that because I think sometimes us as sports fans watching a game from the couch, we can be easily critical of a guy that we feel should have come back from an injury already, or maybe not with hockey players, because hockey players were actually, I think, critical the opposite way. Like, why the heck is he suddenly playing? He broke his leg 2 days ago.
Yeah.
But I feel like a lot of the times you don't understand that it's all more work for these guys to rehab from these injuries than it would be if they just woke up and practiced every day and then played their game. They obviously don't want to be in that situation, but it really does give you an appreciation of how much time and effort they put into making sure their bodies are 100% or as close to peak performance as they possibly can. I haven't seen that McDavid one yet, so I'm going to jot it down on my mental list right now.
Yeah.
One that I had, and I've already watched it, I rewatched it in the last couple weeks, but it's Ice Guardians, and we talk about how the game has changed. This one's a documentary on Netflix. It highlights the enforcer, which has gone from a prevalent part of the game to a couple years ago it was a dying breed, and now I think it's safe to say that the enforcer is essentially extinct in the NHL. There might be a modern day version of the enforcer, but the one we knew in years past, the 6'4", 6'5", 220 plus pound guy that was essentially out there to drop the gloves whenever they could. That part of the game is done for better or for worse, depending on what your opinion of it is. But it's a fascinating dive into the game. It actually takes the angle of why you should have enforcers in hockey, why they were a beneficial part to the game. But it really is an interesting way, essentially how guys are, groomed to be enforcers, to fight for a living. And they knew it from somewhat of an early age that was going to be their role, and they had to embrace it if they wanted to make it in the sport of hockey. And it's even interesting hearing some of them talk about how they really didn't relish the role. They didn't want to be the enforcer, but if they were going to make their mark in the game and they were going to make their money, that was the only way they were going to be able to do it. And so they just hopped on board with it.
Yeah, the one I was able to watch that too. One thing that really stood out to me is the when they talked about the guys who I can't remember who said it, but he said it's like knowing that there's a fight at the end of the school day,
Mm-hmm.
and you're sitting there at lunch and you're waiting for that fight, that school bell to ring at 3:00, and just all the things that go through your head, and how terrifying that is, and guys, you would think that these big tough guys, these big enforcers would relish that, and they'd be ready to go out and take on all comers. But actually, a lot of times they worried about that. They were, I don't know if I would say afraid of it, but they knew that, no, I don't think anybody likes to get punched and beat up a little bit, but it was always a concern of them. And to me, it's an outstanding documentary. But like you mentioned, it's almost outdated, really, because you look at this and you just don't see it in the game anymore. Mm-hmm. You don't see a lot of fighting. You don't see the enforcers. You don't see the stage fights after the puck drop as much as you used to. And I mean, you can debate that all day long, but it's a part of the game that's really changed. Probably, it's probably changed the most of any aspect of the game over the last 5 or 10 years. And it's almost like, you don't even see fights anymore. I mean, look at the Fighting Saints. How many times did they even fight this year?
Yeah, 3, maybe 4 fights. And the one thing I do like about this, and I don't necessarily think I'm pro no fighting in the game, I don't think I'm one side or the other. I'm kind of in the middle. But I do like the fact that staged fighting is kind of out of the game of hockey now. I never really liked the dropping the gloves just to quote unquote spark a team. I know players will say that it sometimes did, but I never really felt like that added anything to the game. I can definitely understand if it's in the rules and it's in the heat of the battle that you would drop the gloves, but I'm pretty glad that staged fighting is at least out of the game. I never felt like that added much to the flow of a hockey game.
Yeah, I don't know either. I mean, it's kind of interesting. I used to be, when I was younger, I used to really enjoy the fighting aspect of it. And then you see a couple real gruesome injuries, and you see what can possibly come of it. And it I don't know if I'm just maturing a little bit, but it kind of doesn't make a lot of sense. And like you said, the stage fighting is, I don't know if there's really a place for that anymore either. It just kind of, and I give leagues like the USHL a lot of credit for, really clamping down on that and getting that out of the game, because you're right. I don't think there's any part of that. And, I think I remember when the debate started about fighting, it was always about the players have to police themselves, and, because there's a lot of little things that go on the ice. And, my initial reaction was, yeah, you have to keep fighting because the refs don't see everything. But I do think, like, now, I think refs or the officials do a much better job of clamping down on all those little garbage things that go on behind the play. And, you protect the players a lot better. The refs do a lot better job of protecting the players, and, the rules are enforced a lot more tightly. And I think that kind of it eliminates that need to fight as much.
Yeah, absolutely. We've started a pretty good list here for some of our listeners, but unfortunately, there's we've reached binge watching territory every single day in terms of the amount of time that some people have. So, what are a couple other things that you would recommend that people watch for their hockey content in this time?
Well, another one that's really along the lines of Ice Guardians. It's called Tough Guy, and it's the Bob Probert story. And when you talk about enforcers, he was probably, arguably, the toughest of all time, or the best enforcer of all times. And it really chronicles, his entire life from when he was a youngster, and how good he was at in being an enforcer. But it also chronicles the tough times that he had with substance abuse. And he actually died. He was in his mid-40s when he passed away about 10 years ago. And, it's an interesting story. I mean, it kind of makes you laugh at times, and it makes you cry at times too, because it's a sad story of how, this guy who was really beloved, he really had a lot of demons and really struggled with it. And, it gave me an entirely different perspective on him. When he was playing with the Red Wings and the Blackhawks, he was probably one of my favorite players because he wasn't just an enforcer. He could play the game. He could score goals. I mean, he was a guy who could score 30 goals for you and really contribute in a lot of different ways other than just fighting. And it was an interesting perspective on him as a person. And, I really like they talk to his family a lot, his wife and his kids. And, you got a perspective on how difficult this profession was on him and on his body and on his mind.
Yeah, it's a good one. I haven't watched that one yet, but one I've heard about multiple times. Another couple things I have on my list, and this is less on the documentary side, obviously, but right now on Netflix, Miracle, the theatrical version of that movie, always a good way to relive that story. But I've been breaking into or I'm going to break into, I should say, the Mighty Ducks DVDs that I have in my house, and just watch as many of those as possible. And that is certainly not a documentary, but just some fun that you can have for about an hour and a half. Watch the Flying V and Gordon Bombay and Conway race around the ice. Those are always fun movies, I feel like, especially right now. Just take your mind off of really anything in the real world for a little bit.
Yeah, that's the nice part about a lot of these shows is, for the longest time I'd be watching SportsCenter, and even SportsCenter seemed like it's been kind of doom and gloom. You talk about, well, geez, we're not going to be back for this amount of time, or no sports for how long. And it's just, or even the nightly news. I mean, it's just nice to have an escape and watch some shows that are more entertaining than anything else, or things that make you laugh, or good documentaries or good comedies or whatever. I mean, it's something that takes your mind off of what's going on, and it's good escape.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot on Netflix. There's some on YouTube as well. If you just Google really hockey documentaries, you can find a bunch as well. And there are plenty out there. So there's no shortage of hockey content right now. And also with the recommendation that you get outside as much as you can these days as well. Best thing to do as well is just go outside and play some hockey if you can in any way, in your backyard, a local park, away from everyone else. But yeah, I think you can mix in some of our suggestions with watching hockey, with also playing a little hockey outside, and try to get yourself through the next month or so, however long this continues to drag on. But hopefully these recommendations find their way onto your TV screen pretty soon. I think there's a lot of good stuff, and I know I'll take some from Jim's list and be watching those sooner rather than later. But speaking of hockey content, we'll take our first break, and when we come back, we dive into our interview with Austin Rueschhoff. And recently, he signed an entry-level deal with the New York Rangers, so we touch on him signing that deal, leaving Western Michigan a year early, and of course, talking about his time with the Fighting Saints. Back in a moment here on the Fighting Saints Report podcast. And we're joined now by a very special guest, a Saint for life in Austin Rueschhoff. And Austin, thanks so much for taking the time today.
No problem.
Yeah, so first and foremost, I know the sports world has kind of come to an abrupt end for everyone, but even after your college season ended, you got some pretty good news right off the bat afterwards. And just less than a week, I think, after your college season ends, you're able to ink an entry-level deal with the New York Rangers. Take us through the 24-hour process of how you felt right after signing it and what it was like leading up to signing that deal as well.
Well, it's definitely a special feeling. You know, it's a dream come true. You dream about it when you're in AAA and even in juniors in college that you want to sign a deal in the NHL. And, you know, luckily for me, that dream came true. And to be honest, it was a pretty crazy 24 hours before that, you know, just finding out your season's over and possibly your college career. And it just started with a conference call pretty much from at home. Everyone's been staying away from everybody. So, and then things kind of started picking up, and I felt like the decision to leave school and early, and kind of had the same decision where I could have stayed one more year in Dubuque, but felt like the right move was to go to college, and kind of the same decision that I had to make, and didn't want to, you know, not take that same chance.
You mentioned the abruptness of your season ending, and I know that's not what really anyone wants to dwell on, but what was going on when you found out the news, and how exactly did you find out the news that everything was going to end in the manner that it did?
Well, I woke up Thursday, ready for practice, had practice. We heard right before that day, so on Wednesday, that the games were still on, but we were going to online classes, and then had a normal practice, got out of practice, and then heard that each player gets like 6 tickets for our home game, and that's all they're letting in. And then not even like an hour later, we were at lunch and found out that the playoffs were canceled.
Yeah, it seems everything in the whole situation just escalated so quickly with the entire sports world and everything. So now that you've had a little bit more time after the culmination of the season, overall, how would you assess this season on a personal level with Western Michigan?
I feel like it was good. I struggled in the beginning a little bit, but then started picking up my game and realizing how I need to play. And I would say I finished off pretty hot, and my line was especially hot during going into the playoffs. So it's kind of frustrating that you're on that streak and it kind of abruptly ends, and it's not because of you losing your last game.
Right, and with the emotions, you know, still a couple weeks out from that ending of the season, emotions still raw. But when you look back at your 3 years at Western, what was that overall experience like for you to be a part of a team like that for 3 seasons?
It was unbelievable. Just the guys that are there from the seniors when I was a freshman, you know, you still talk to them, and I know they come into town every once in a while, and they're like a family. It's everybody knows each other and really well, hangs out with everybody. There's not really any cliques on the team at all. You know, the coaches were super special there too. Overall, the program was unbelievable, and I'm glad that I got to go to Western for 3 years.
Do you have a favorite 1 or 2 memories from your time at Western Michigan?
My freshman year, we actually swept Denver, and they were the number 1 team at the time, just came off winning the national championship. And I think we came back both games down 3 goals and ended up sweeping them at home. And that was super special. And that was kind of my first big moment in college where you kind of connect as a team.
And obviously not just the hockey career now over at Western with you signing that deal with the Rangers, but also just the college life. in general. Outside of hockey, what was a part of it that you just enjoyed so much about being a college student and just an individual in the college life, maybe that doesn't have anything to do with hockey?
I think it was special that outside of the rink and all that, you kind of it was a very athletic school, so everyone kind of looked on each other kind of equally. No one was really above anybody, so it's kind of cool to just be able to hang out with people and learn where they're from, and be able to hang out with other people just besides your teammates.
Mm-hmm. So when you commit to Western, if we can go back there, right after your time with Dubuque, you end up going to Western Michigan. After playing that season in the USHL, which player from the USHL that was also part of the NCHC, which for those that don't know is the conference that Western plays in, which player from the USHL that you had played against in your year were you most excited to be able to play against again in the collegiate level?
Man, I would say my old teammate, Bushy. I know he stayed one more year when I was there, but it's always cool to play against your old teammates and see from the other side and your perspective of how they played while they were on Dubuque.
Mm-hmm. And you when you had your first year at Western, you had or excuse me, I'm looking at the wrong thing right now, but your first year at Western when you come from the USHL, I know the jump from midgets and lower levels to juniors is a big jump. What was the transition like from then the junior level to the collegiate level for you?
It wasn't much different. I feel, you still live away from home. I think the only difference is obviously you don't have a billet, so you're kind of living on your own. But I think for the game side of it, definitely a lot faster. You got to think a lot quicker too. Higher skill. You're playing against guys that are 4 or 5 years older than you, maybe even more depending on when you go in. But I think just the game was a lot quicker and a lot faster.
And you spent 1 year in the USHL, and then the year before that, you had a season under your belt in the NAHL. How big do you think it was to have the multiple years of junior experience, albeit not 2 at the USHL level, but 2 years of solid junior hockey under your belt before you went to college?
It was good. I think the development side of junior hockey is huge, and I feel like I went into junior hockey to be there to develop. And each coach I had from the NAHL and especially in the USHL was super special, and those guys helped me a lot to get where I was and where I am now.
Looking back at your year in Dubuque, how would you sum up that season, maybe just from an individual perspective first, but then just overall what your experience was like in the Dubuque hockey community?
God, it was special. That was probably one of my most favorite years of hockey so far. But, just from the fans to the teammates to the billets, everybody was connected in that community. And even now I hear back from fans from Dubuque, and I even, hang out with my billets. They've come down to watch me play in Western Michigan a couple times, and it's almost like a family community in Dubuque.
Is there a specific game or a specific moment on home ice that sticks out to you above others when you think back on your time at Dubuque?
Definitely the Cedar Rapids games. Each time we played Cedar Rapids, it was a sold-out barn, and it was unbelievable just hearing the crowd get rowdy and hearing the music and everything just happen. It almost happened like in slow motion.
You mentioned the billet families, and I recently had a conversation with Nate Soucis, and he mentioned the billet families as well. When you were billeting with those parents, I mean, what did it – I know it's obviously everyone is grateful, but how much of it, for people that don't know what goes into being a billet, how much of it from your perspective just seemed like above and beyond from what they were doing?
It almost seems like, they'd taken another child pretty much. They would help me with I took some classes before I went to Western. They would help me with that. They would, whatever I needed, they would go out and get. And whether I was doing something wrong, they would let me know. Or if I needed to clean my room a little bit, they would make sure that I would let them know. But it was definitely like a family atmosphere. You know, you were part of the family. It wasn't you were just a hockey player living in a house. They made you part of the family.
You mentioned that every Cedar Rapids game was kind of up an octave in terms of the energy in the building at Mesquite Community Ice Center. In terms of anywhere at any time in that year in Dubuque, do you have a top hockey memory, maybe on the ice, and then do you have a top memory off the ice as well?
I would say off the ice was hanging out with. We'd have poker night before every. I don't know if they still do it there now, but
Yeah, they still have that going on, I think.
Really, that's
Yeah.
good to hear.
Yeah.
Awesome. It would be at my place the entire year, but they would that off ice moment where everybody would come over, whether they played poker or not. It was the whole team came over. It was a team event and it was super special. I'd say on the ice, just those practices. You know, I've had some junior practices where they suck and you don't really want to be out there. I feel like every time I went out there, our coaches, our players made it fun. You know, you wanted to be at the rink every day. And it was super special.
Who were your billet parents when you were in Dubuque?
I lived with the Edwards.
Edwards. Okay, so that's still where, to my knowledge, that is still where poker night goes on. So the tradition lives on, not just the action of poker night, but it's still the same venue every single time.
That's great to hear.
The Edwards, I think, are the Dubuque equivalent of the MGM Grand then, with hosting all that poker action.
That's what it was. You can put my name on there as one of the founders there.
There you go. Well, maybe they should have it like a Austin Rueschhoff Memorial Poker Night or something like that. Come back, be the
Just make sure you don't let Solo or Tyson in there. Those guys would cheat and somehow find a way to get the money.
There you go. When you're looking back for the again that year in Dubuque and everything that you worked on in that season and practices that you just mentioned, but also in the games, what was the biggest gain, the biggest positive that you got in terms of building yourself into a hockey player that was able to compete at the collegiate level?
I'd say the defensive side of the game. The very beginning of the year, I remember it was horrible. I was never in the right spot. And Lammers, who was the head coach at the time, was made me do a what was it? It was a you find 3 bad clips, 1 good clip, and a clip you had a question on, and we did it once every week. So every time after every Monday or Tuesday, and I would come in with the video with him, and he would go over it with me, and I felt like that was a big turning point in my defensive game, and that's what I think got me to the NCAA level, and did the same thing when I was in college, and that's might be probably the reason why I have an NHL contract.
And when you speak on that NHL contract, as we're wrapping up here, even though there's no sports going on right now, obviously there's always work going on for anyone that's in the sports world. What are the next couple steps for your game? What do you want to work on to get better, to be ready for the next step in your career?
Definitely the speed side of it. Every time you move up a level, it gets faster and faster. And I definitely know that the NHL is the fastest that it could possibly go, and definitely need to work on that. It's tough right now with no ice available or anything. You kind of just work it out in your basement with the programs that you got, but definitely the speed side of it, the agility, quick feet, just overall speed side of the game.
Well, you mentioned speed. We'll see if you have some of that right now, because we like to end these with a rapid fire question section, if you're in for that.
Cool, I'm in for it. Let's go.
Alrighty, absolutely. So it doesn't just have to be a 1 or 2 word answer. You can give a little bit of explanation if you want to give a backstory and why. But we'll start out with your favorite road trip in the USHL.
Chicago.
And when you're going on those road trips, what was your go-to snack on those bus trips?
Skittles.
Favorite barn to play in the NCHC, obviously outside of Western?
North Dakota.
Your go-to video game right now, if you are a video game player?
Fortnite.
What's a cheat day meal that you enjoy?
I would say pizza.
Alrighty, everyone's shut in right now. So what are you recommending to binge on Netflix right now, and why?
On Netflix, I would say, or even I don't really watch Netflix, but I'm more of a Disney Plus guy right now. And on that, I would say the Clone Wars it's like a Star Wars animated film. I've been watching that. It's kind of in between the second and third movie. It's pretty good.
Alrighty, so Star Wars fans who are tuning in here, maybe Tom Madden, if you're tuning in right now, definitely listen to Austin's recommendation on the Clone Wars. Well, Austin, thanks so much for taking the time. We really appreciate.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Alrighty, take care.
Thanks.
And we welcome you back to the Fighting Saints Report podcast. Hope you enjoyed that interview with former Fighting Saint Austin Rueschhoff. Now have Jim Leitner back on the line. And we don't have a ton of time left here on this podcast, but we figured I've been seeing this on Twitter and social media a lot, different games you can play. And one of the things I've seen in the NHL is build your dream overtime team, your 3-on-3 lineup, the best one that you could possibly compete with. Some of these have been doing different columns where you have one pick from a $5 column, one pick from a $4 column, one pick from a quote-unquote $3 column, and you have to build your dream team. But we're going to do a USHL edition. So we have all USHL alum on the board available to us, and we're going to try to build the best 3-on-3 overtime team that we possibly can. Jim got the first pick in the draft. And we're going to see with what you guys think after the show, which team would win more 3-on-3 games if we played best of 10 series or something like that. So Jim, I'll let you start off, and we'll just give why we picked each player, a little explanation of why they're part of our 3-on-3 team.
Well, you have to start with Johnny Gaudreau if you're a Dubuque fan. I think you almost have to. But you know, he's such a slippery player, and I think when the NHL went to 3-on-3 for overtime, it was almost as if that was pretty much created for Johnny Gaudreau, because you give him open ice and you give him time to be creative. He's going to be able to work a lot of magic, and he's one of the most exciting players in the National Hockey League as well. So I think it's kind of an easy hometown pick to go with Johnny Gaudreau. But again, he's such an exciting player to watch, especially when he's got open ice. And that's why I went with him as my number one pick.
And because you wanted to win the vote as well.
Well, yeah, I know my audience. I mean, that's the key. I know my audience.
It's a smart pick, and especially because the rules dictated that we couldn't duplicate a pick, and we couldn't duplicate teams as well. So that took Johnny Gaudreau off the board for me. I went with Austin Matthews for my first pick, a player that has instantly become one of the stars and faces of the NHL. He's going to be one of the top goal scorers for a long time in the league. And he's not as elusive as Johnny Gaudreau. He's more of a power forward, but he's got a wicked shot. He's still got good speed. And on 3-on-3, when puck possession is so important, he's able to shield the puck with his big body and just continue to create some time and space for not just himself, but his teammates as well. So I took Austin Matthews with the number one pick.
Yeah, my second pick, I went with TJ Oshie from the Washington Capitals. He played for the Sioux Falls Stampede about 12 years ago, about 15 years ago. And he's just such a money player. You know, he's got a Stanley Cup ring on his finger, and he's a guy who just seems like he's a money player and a guy that you'd want to have on the ice in 3-on-3 and overtime. So he's unfortunately, we didn't get to see him in Dubuque because that was at a time when the USHL was not in Dubuque. But he's a fun guy to watch, and one of the players that I really enjoy watching in the NHL right now.
Yeah, I went with a defenseman for my second pick, and looking at the list, I felt like there was a bigger crop of forwards that I would take for a 3-on-3 team than defensemen. So even though I was only drafting against you, Jim, I decided to take a defenseman with my second pick because this is the guy I wanted, and that's Jacob Slavin. Slavin played for the Chicago Steel, and actually not 2 seasons ago, Josiah Slavin, his younger brother, was playing for the Chicago Steel as well. He's a Chicago Blackhawks draft pick, a Colorado College commit in Josiah Slavin. But Slavin has turned into one of the better defensive defensemen in the game. And this season with Carolina was the first year he really added that offensive spark as well. Bigger body, but a really smooth skater and has some sneaky speed. And again, for my 3-on-3 team, to have a guy on the back end that can provide the offense, but also if there's a breakdown, can get back and play really good defense and give you that chance to win on the defensive end in a 3-on-3 battle, I'll take Slavin all day.
Yeah. For my defenseman, I went a little bit younger. I went with Brandon Montour of the Buffalo Sabres, and he's a former Waterloo Blackhawk. And when he was in Waterloo just a couple of years ago, he was absolutely dominant. You know, he was a guy who he skated like the wind. I mean, he was a beautiful skater. He was up and down the ice, and you know, he was a guy that you know, when you get to overtime, 3-on-3 overtime, he was a guy that could take over the game and really dominate. And now he's with Buffalo, but I think he's a guy who's going to. I think he's going to be a superstar before too long. And but I remember him from his days in Waterloo, where he just torched teams and just absolutely dominated the game. And you know, I think when he gets a little bit more experience at the NHL level, he's going to be a superstar for a long time.
My final pick, a player that I don't think has reached superstardom yet, but might be headed that way, is a guy who absolutely dominated in the USHL as well when he was there. Had one of the best single seasons in the Tier 1 era, and that's Kyle Connor. Now of the Winnipeg Jets, but formerly of the Youngstown Phantoms. And certainly in Youngstown's Tier 1 era, he is the most notable name that they've had on the team. I love his speed, and I love his smarts. I remember watching him when he was playing against Penn State for the University of Michigan, and that entire line he had with Comfort and Mott as well was heads and shoulders above the rest of Division I hockey that year. So Connor has continued to progress every single level. Very impressive, very good hands, and very good speed as well. So he's the speed aspect, with Matthews being the puck possession and more of a brute force guy on the opposite wing for the 3-on-3 competition there. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the fans decide, and it'll be interesting to see if the fans can look beyond your Homer Johnny Gaudreau pick and pick the actual best 3-on-3 team that was drafted here. But that's my pitch. That's my lobby for someone to pick a team that doesn't have any Fighting Saints on it.
It's always fun to create these kind of almost like fantasy drafts and kind of figure out how you would do it if you could pick. And but it's always fun. I think Johnny's hopefully Johnny's gonna sway the vote in my favor.
Yeah, I think you might have a leg up there with the Johnny Gaudreau pick, but we'll see if what the people decide. We'll put that to a vote on our social media here in the upcoming days. And again, hope you enjoyed the interview with Austin Rueschhoff. Next week, we'll be diving into an interview with Hunter Miska, and we'll continue to bring you Fighting Saints content, not just for the months that we have to be contained in our homes, but for the foreseeable future after that as well. Loving to do these podcasts and just want to continue to keep the ball rolling and get some more Fighting Saints or former Fighting Saints on this show as well. As always, Jim, thanks for the time. Hope everything is well back there in Iowa, and we'll look forward to doing this again next week.
You bet. Everybody stay safe out there, and do what you're told. Stay at home and be safe, and we'll all get through this together.
Absolutely. Binge watch some hockey and play some hockey while you're at it as well. All right, everyone. Until next time, I'm Jack Milewski for Jim Leitner, signing off for the Fighting Saints Report podcast.